Welcome back. Our second guest tonight is Sandra Brown. Sandra is the CEO of the Institute for Relational Harm Reduction and Public Psychopathy Education. She is a psychopathologist, program development specialist, lecturer, and award-winning author. Her books include Women Who Love Psychopaths, as well as How to Spot a Dangerous Man Before You Get Involved, and Counseling Victims of Violence. Sandra is recognized for her pioneering work on women issues related to relational harm. Her books, CDs, DVDs, and other training materials have been used as curriculum in drug rehabs, women's organizations and shelters, women's jail and prison, schools and college-based programs, inner-city projects, and various psychology and sociology programs distributed in almost every country in the world. Welcome to the show, Sandra.
Hi, Sandra. Welcome.
Hi. Thank you for having me.
Sandra, you are a psychopathologist who specializes in women's issues related to relational harm. You've written several books on this, including Women Who Love Psychopaths. Your books are distributed worldwide to shelters, prison programs, women's organizations, the list goes on. And I guess my first question is what is a psychopathologist? And also, what inspires you to get involved in this specific area of relational harm and its relation to psychopathology?
Well, the psychopathologist is simply a mental health professional who works with chronic mental illnesses, which are those types of disorders that are permanent, that are not likely to clear up. And I got involved in the victims' rights movement back in the 80s when my father was murdered by a psychopath. And as does many crime victims, it changes their career path. It changes their entire life. And so I became interested in this issue about psychopathy, psychopaths, sociopaths, and the danger, especially in personal relationships, that they pose.
What are the traits of a psychopath?
Well, psychopaths, we often have that image of like Charlie Manson, and yet many of them are successful, charming, bright, white-collar kinds of people. And psychopathy is basically no conscience. It is low empathy, no conscience, no remorse, poor impulse control. And I think in relational harm, especially when the woman is not likely to spot that early on because they hide that well, it is our conscience and our empathy that makes us human. And without that, that's when we start to see the chronic domestic violence repeaters or those who go on to do the worst harm and murder.
So is there a certain trait in a psychopath that you would recognize or that you can help people to recognize? You know where I'm going with this? Is there something in them that maybe if you didn't notice or know that you were with a psychopath initially, if you're talking to a psychopath, if you're starting to date somebody, what are little signs, telltale signs that could alert you that this could be the case?
Well, unfortunately with psychopathy, it's usually after people have been in the relationship a while. I mean, part of what they're really good at, they show this image of a mask, with the psychopath, the Jekyll and Hyde, that it's after the woman is in the relationship where things start to not add up. For instance, the pathological lying or poor impulse control. Maybe it's the ability to go from zero to rage, in a couple of seconds. Maybe it's poor impulse control in spending or drugs or alcohol. And usually with some of the psychopaths, you have elements of narcissism, which becomes probably the quickest thing that becomes evident. It is the glaring narcissism, the it's all about me kind of thing with them. But I think the telltale signs are usually a reduced capacity for empathy that she will see later on in the relationship, ways in which he does not show normal amounts of conscience or empathy towards other people.
Yeah, in your book, you talked about this mask, a mask of sanity. It's like psychopaths are excellent imposters, and they can live their whole lives hiding under this mask. are behind this mask. So does it always come out, this violent behavior or this bad behavior in a psychopath, or do they hide it, or can they hide it for long periods of time, and or for their whole life for that matter?
Yes, I mean, absolutely. I think that the actual psychopaths are the ones who have turned criminal, in which they get caught. Sociopaths are often those that kind of fly under the radar. And some of them are, really successful and do quite well. And the only people that know that they are sociopaths are those in the personal, intimate relationship that have been harmed by him. I mean, we've just gone through the whole thing with the Bernie Madoff situation, in which, probably a lot of people that invested with him never saw the signs of sociopathy in him. So, unfortunately, the glaring parts of that become evident once they get caught, but the criminal psychopaths are only the ones that have been caught. That there are millions of psychopaths, and sociopaths that have never been caught, so we have not identified them yet. In fact, I think it was Martha Stout in her book, The Sociopath Next Door, that said 1 in 25 people have no conscience. So
that is frightening.
Isn't that mortifying? Really. So next time you're in a big group of people, just sort of count to get a visual of what we're talking about. Just count off 1 in 25. That's sort of a representation that this disorder is not uncommon. It is quite common.
Sandra, a sociopath, a psychopath, they are the same thing, except one flies under the radar and the other one gets caught? Is that correct?
Well, technically not. I mean, Robert Hare, who's the world's leading expert on psychopathy, says the actual criminal psychopaths, when they do MRIs of the brain, that there are neurological abnormalities on their MRIs. Sociopaths very often are produced from early childhood influences. But for our purposes and our work at the Institute, we lump them together, the sociopath and the psychopath, because the end result to the victim is the same thing, whether they're psychopathic or sociopathic. So a lot of times sociopaths are referred to non-criminal psychopaths. But, I mean, if you want to get technical, no, they're not exactly the same thing.
Gotcha. Okay.
So is this something that a person is born with? Is this a brain disorder that a person is born with, or do they develop it? And also, if they are born, let's just get the answer to that question, and then I'll go to the next one. I'm sorry. So is it a birth defect?
Well, the sociopaths are believed to be made that way, that it came from something in their environment, abuse, trauma, neglect, under the age of 8 or so when your personality is developing. The psychopaths, they are finding to have genetic and neuro abnormalities. So the actual psychopath is born that way, where a sociopath is much more likely to have been made that way in her early childhood.
I see. So then I wonder, is there help for these people? In other words, is there some kind of rehabilitation, or is there help for them? Is there something that can be done for the psychopath?
No.
I'm really curious about that. Okay.
Yeah, no. In our book, Women Who Love Psychopaths, there's a whole chapter in there on the neuroabnormalities, because what we're talking about in the brain is problems in all sorts of regions of the brain, not just one area. I mean, this is not something that is fixed. The sociopath, even with that, with early childhood issues, their treatment outcomes have been so low that we basically say, no, it's not treatable. The issue in, domestic violence is that these people are not being differentiated from other abusers. That when a sociopath or a psychopath commits domestic violence, they are put, no matter what their treatment likelihood, their outcome is, they are put through the same thing that a non-pathological abuser is. They're sent to anger management, they're sent to battery intervention, without ever identifying that this is someone who is not going to respond to treatment. And then they get, sent back home. And then we see, the horrendous outcomes of that, which are that it is estimated that 85% of repeat domestic violence has to do with these disorders, that these are the guys that don't respond. And so I think that's the scary part about sociopaths and psychopaths in domestic violence, is what ends up not being identified in them.
Sandra, how can we get them to identify this? Because I know that with a lot of these batterer treatment programs and anger management programs, they just put them into one room and everybody is treated the same, like you just mentioned.
Yes.
How can we get the word out there, or what can we do to help these victims realize that, hey, a sociopath or a psychopath is not going to get better, or a psychopath definitely won't get better.
Mm-hmm.
How can we educate the victim in all of this information that you're getting out? Because here, psychopaths go unrecognized. 6 million men and 2 million women you have in your book. I mean, 6 million men, that's frightening. So how can we protect these victims of domestic violence that are engaging in this charming behavior and these wonderful people? And what do we do? How can we do that?
Well, I think that this is the tweak that needs to happen in the domestic violence educational process, is that all abusers are not created equal. There are some that are treatable and some that are not treatable. And the ones that are dangerous are the ones that are not treatable. And that we need to help women be able to identify that. But right now, that is not the focus in domestic violence. I mean, if we do the math on how many psychopaths are out there and how many people have been harmed in relationships by them, we have 60 million people negatively impacted by somebody else's psychopathy. If that was 60 million people affected with a medical condition, there would be, a public awareness campaign. There would be billboards. There would be a famous celebrity spokesperson. There would be grants and money. There is no public pathology awareness funded educational campaign in this country. These are the most dangerous people on the
scary.
It's very scary, and it's maddening. I've been at this for 20 years, and while I do see things, the educational part becoming a little better, there still is not anything focused at this. And these are the most dangerous people on the planet. These are the people who murder. These are the people who rape. These are the people who have repeat domestic violence, who swindle. Who do we think that does this? So I think that's where this has to go eventually, is that it is the thing that's missing from domestic violence education to the victims. And we have a lot of domestic violence people who come through our training programs and have an aha moment, either when they read our book or when we train them. But it's got to get at a much more broad, global impact, because I really think this is the missing piece. And when the women get this, when they're able to identify that their abuser does fall within these categories of these disorders, I can count on one hand, out of thousands and thousands of women, I can count on one hand how many went back. And the general domestic violence power and control wheel kind of Duluth model approach doesn't come anywhere near to those success numbers. Women get it. They get it when they understand pathology.
And it's 7 to 10 times a victim of domestic violence will go back to her abusive relationship.
Well, and why do they go back? They go back because they think he can change. When the women come through our program, they have a whole 2-hour class in neuroscience. We show them the MRIs. We talk about what parts are affected, merely willful behavior. On top of this, that this is a permanent condition, and here are the neurological aspects to it. And when they're faced with that information on the neuro abnormalities of these people, they get it. It's been the number one thing that has really made these women make a paradigm shift.
So what you're saying then, in essence, is that when the courts start identifying these individuals as psychopaths, when that is the case, then the outcome of that, what I was going to ask you is where will we go next once they're identified? But then now I see where it leads, because then once they're identified, then you can give that information to the victim, and the victim now is a little more empowered as far as understanding that, no, they can't change this person. There is really no hope here. And if you go back, okay, that makes complete sense now, which is...
Yes, exactly. If we're just looking at what can we do to the victim, for the victim, what we can do is help them identify which guys can change and which can't and why. Because a lot of times when they go through DV programs now, they're just told he won't change. Well, won't change is very different from can't change. Won't change is a willful attitude. He needs more education, he needs more therapy, he needs God, he needs something, but can't change. And here's his brain with a picture of the neuro is an entirely different thing. It's been the best thing that we've incorporated. But the courts don't do that. I just had an eye-opening experience speaking at a state commission on family violence, the keynote speaker, in which I taught the neuroscience of the batterer's brain. That's what I was talking about. And so at the end, all these court psychologists raised their hand and said, do you realize we're not allowed to do that? We are not allowed to include in our report to the judges any of his mental health history or his addiction history, including whether or not he's a psychopath. Is that insane?
Oh, my God. That doesn't make any sense.
I was mortified. It was a southern state, a southern-based state, a good old play system state in which, several of them, some of the people that ran the batter intervention groups raised their hand and said the same thing. Yeah, we're not allowed to either. Anger management people raised their hand. Yeah, we're not allowed to either. So even if these psychologists suspected that the batterer was a sociopath or a psychopath, and of course, that carries a lot of informational weight to a judge. In some states, they are not turning in that information to the judge. So how does that protect the victim?
It doesn't.
I mean, it doesn't.
No, it doesn't. Okay, so each state, yes, is different. I mean, there is no uniformity in this country whatsoever, and I yell and scream about that every single day. Okay, so every state, if they have laws like this, women are going to end up dead. Victims are going to end up dead, and that is just the bottom line. So then, when they come back in hindsight and they look at this, they go, oh, I should have, could have, would have. What if only. I mean, that is a scary thing when you're talking about somebody's life.
Yeah.
Homicides aren't treated like that. Homicides, you do the background of them, you check them. I mean, they do all kinds of things. But when it comes to this, I mean, I am stunned. I am completely shocked.
With my mouth hanging open, it was very hard for me to, think of the next thing to say. I think I said something like an expletive, what the F, out loud. I had no filter from my brain to my mouth. I was like, what? You've got to be kidding me. And the interesting thing was when I left, I had a book table there, and every one of my books sold out. And then people were emailing me, a lot of the psychologists, and said, we were afraid to speak up. It took a lot of courage for us to tell you that. And when you left, the commission said out loud, make sure to never have her back again.
Oh, my.
Who let her in with that unorthodox message?
Okay, now,
we've got a long way to go.
Yes, we do. And every listener here, every victim of domestic violence, anyone that wants to have a really brilliant education on sociopaths, psychopaths, narcissists, whatever. I mean, I'm sure there's so many more. Women Who Love Psychopaths, Sandra L. Brown. We need to get that book out to the masses. In your book, you also have a guide to a normal person's language versus a psychopath's language. And this, I'm looking at it right now, and I'm sitting there going, a normal person's language, love. A psychopath's language, her compliance. A normal person's language on trust, A psychopath's language is paranoia. And the list goes on and on and on. And I'm saying, I think there is just a wealth of information in your book. And Sandra, I believe that every person, everyone, every victim of domestic violence, everyone should read this. I'll tell you, I was sitting and reading it last night, and I was glued to it. There is just so much information of things that I had no idea about, and it's just extremely educational and eye-opening as well. Woman Who Loves Psychopaths, Sandra L. Brown. Get that book. We're going to have it on our website also, Sandra, and we can get that book out there, and we can help you do that as well. I wanted to ask you about the training program that you have as well. Mm-hmm. Where is that training program?
Well, first of all, we come by invitation, so for keynote speaking or whatever, but once a year we also have a training program. This year it's going to be in Hilton Head in January, and we train mental health professionals in the ability
Hilton Head?
for them to Hilton Head, South Carolina. Mm-hmm.
South Carolina, okay.
Yes, and so mental health professionals, a lot of therapists get these couples in counseling and do not pick up on that he is a sociopath, a narcissist, a psychopath. So we offer that, and we also offer retreats for victims a couple times a year.
Okay, so how can we keep up to date on what is happening with this conference so that we can notify people and let them know that this is happening?
Well, you can sign up on the website, saferelationshipsmagazine.com. There's a place on there to get a weekly newsletter from us, and that has a lot of the updates on our training, and it's also on the magazine website as well.
Okay, so we'll put a link on our site, detoxradio.com, to Safe Relationships as well, so that people can be informed of what you're doing and what is to come. And this is just amazing. But we'll do whatever we can to help you, Sandra.
Thank you. Thank you, ladies.
Yeah, thanks so much for being with us.
And
Thank you for having me.
I did want to mention, too, that I do recommend Women Who Love Psychopaths. It is just an awesome book, and I hope everybody gets a copy. So, again, it will be on our website. Sandra, thank you so much. You've been wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Have a great day.
You
Bye-bye.
Too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
We'll be right back.
If you're in the market for a voiceover for your next e-learning project, commercial, audiobook narration, corporate video, or phone system, we are here to assist you. Visit us at www.ineedavoiceover.com.
We'd like to thank both our guests for joining us tonight and sharing some great information.
For guest and other show information, visit us at detoxradio.com. That's DTALKS radio.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at Detox Radio Show and find us on Facebook by clicking the Facebook icon on our website. See you next week. Good night.
Good night.
If you would like information about upcoming shows or are interested in booking a speaker, visit www.detoxradio.com. Thank you for listening to Detox Radio with Denise and Danielle. Be sure to tune in next week for another great show.